All right, let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and welcome to another educational webinar, Preventing Firefighter Disorientation, hosted by Andy Starnes from Inside Training. After a 30-plus year career with the Charlotte, North Carolina Fire Department, Andy is now a retired chief. Andy is one of the experts in thermal training, and we're very lucky to have him join us today. If anyone has any questions during the webinar, please type them in the questions field. We'll try to answer them one-to-one, or Andy will address any at the end of the presentation if we have some time. One quick note, Seek Thermal does have a burn program to demo our cameras. You can find all that info on our site, www.thermal.com. And if you want to find any authorized dealer in your area, you can find that on our site as well. So without further ado, Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate everyone taking your time today. This is a particular subject that's near and dear to my heart. So if I tend to be a little bit more passionate than I normally am, I will pre-apologize now, but I won't apologize for trying to save people's lives that mean the world to me, which is you, the firefighter. So let's talk about something that's very important, and it's a subject that's been going on for quite some time. It's called firefighter disorientation. I open with this following slide for a particular reason. I have a lot of friends who are really good firefighters, and I've heard the statement, "Oh, it never happened to me. We don't train on RIT. We don't train on these things because if we're fundamentally skilled, we're going to be fine." I've been lost and disoriented inside of a fire 3 times, one in an actual fire, 2 in a training environment. I should have been dead. There's no reason I should be sitting here before you other than the grace of God and good firefighters who helped me out when I made mistakes. I know some of the most respectable firefighters, some of which work on my cadre, who have had terrible things happen to them and they ended up in a Mayday situation, completely outside of their control in some areas and some contributing factors in others. Bottom line is, it can happen to anyone. So the best thing we can do is be fundamentally sound and be prepared for the worst, because that's what the citizens expect, and your family demands that of each of us. So situational awareness is a term that Dr. Gasaway is an expert on. We're going to talk about thermal situational awareness. I would refer you to Dr. Gasaway's site and his team if you want to learn more about brain science and how that affects your decision making. But that will tie in quite well with what we're talking about, but I am not the expert in that. I just want to refer you to many resources as we go through this presentation. There are QR codes buried in this presentation, and there's a copy of the presentation, a link to a Google Drive folder with the presentation and some of the media and a couple of resources for your reading at the end of the presentation for you to review to make sure you can go deeper into this subject, because 1 hour is not enough. So firefighter disorientation is a topic that's been written about, blogged about, researched, and studied. Unfortunately, it hasn't been studied enough. And it's actually defined as the loss of direction or lack of vision in a structure fire. It's one of the most oldest and serious hazards, according to NIOSH, that usually precedes a firefighter fatality. Don Abbott's work in Project Mayday says in one of the 25 contributing factors to a Mayday, if you hear the following words, "We're encountering high heat and we're unable to find the fire," you're about to have a Mayday. And one of the things that you can read on that can help you understand this a little bit better is the U.S. Firefighter Disorientation Study written by William Mora, who also wrote a book through fire engineering called Preventing Firefighter Disorientation, which I highly recommend you read. I've written an article in honor of his work that kind of points out some of the things he talks about and some other things involving thermal imaging cameras. There's a QR code at the bottom here that'll take you to that, that'll help you understand the basis of what the point of this entire webinar, and hopefully opening your eyes to the point that we work in limited to zero visibility environments 90% of the time when we go in a burning building. We need to have a plan. We need to be able to see certain ways in and out, even though the environment may limit us. That doesn't mean we can't have plans and ways to find our way in and out, especially when things go bad. Some of the data that's very compelling for you to think about is, according to the U.S. Fire Administration, 18% of all fireground injuries occurred being due to firefighters becoming disoriented. Don Abbott's work points out some of the Maydays occurred to firefighters being separated from the hose line due to other reasons, such as falling through a roof. This picture is when I was on a 3rd alarm fire in my old department, and this particular roof is an 80,000 square foot building. And if you don't walk on the right spot here, There's nothing between the two metal I-beams but styrofoam and tin. And that could be the end of you by simply stepping in the wrong spot. 8 firefighters lost their lives in 2022 due to becoming lost and disoriented. But from 2016 to 2022, according to U.S. Fire Administration, 23 firefighters lost their lives due to becoming lost and disoriented. The U.S. Firefighter Disorientation Study that spans a 16-year period shows 23 fireground deaths of firefighters, and it draws parallels and comparisons to the same contributing factors on each one, which actually leads to something called the disorientation sequence, which we'll talk about. And the FAA published a study that said people can lose spatial orientation, basically become disoriented in low visibility or no visibility in as little as 178 seconds. Think about that. So the data is pretty solid that we continue to get lost a lot. Whether it's a mayday or a line of duty death, it occurs pretty much everywhere in America, probably once a day, if not more. But the problem is a lot of this is not tracked accurately, and we're just based it on statistics that we get from various organizations that do report it. This is an actual chart from the U.S. Fire Administration that shows those studies and shows that 18% of those injuries were due to becoming lost, trapped, or caught. You can actually read that study right here, and it shows out of those injuries, that was 63,000 injuries, equates to 12,000 injuries, and 46% of those, when they were lost and disoriented and got hurt, required time off from work. How many firefighters work second jobs? How many are constantly doing other things off duty, taking care of their family? Now you can't do your normal schedule. What if we could prevent that or reduce it? Everyone thinks that a lot of us are trying to stop firefighter deaths and firefighter injuries. The reality is we work in an inherently dangerous occupation. There's no way we can prevent every aspect and be totally risk adverse. The job just doesn't allow that. There's too many variables we can't control. However, the variables we can control, we often don't. As my friend Dennis Laguerre says, never insert a variable where you can insert constant. Let's put in some constants to give us some security in an insecure and uncertain environment. One of the things that they talk about in the disorientation study is basically the number of things that contributed to firefighter disorientation. And if you look at those things, you will find a common theme in all of them, which is they became disoriented due to events such as flashover, backdraft. They were in there in prolonged periods of limited or zero visibility. Those are all due to something happening. Secondary to steam conversion, which one of the things I will talk about in a couple other slides on how cameras can hinder or help that depending on how you're using them. And there's a picture of a limited to zero visibility environment right there in the middle. And there's a picture of me teaching after I got sprayed with water and how much my face piece is not very visible or clear for me at that point. And one of the things that we'll hammer is firefighters, when their face piece looks like this, they're going to wipe their face piece. Nobody's going to drive around with a windshield covered with dirt where they can't see, with their windshield wipers off in a pouring rainstorm. You need to remember that if you use a thermal imaging camera, what's in front of that camera is called a lens. If you don't wipe that lens every time you feel the need to wipe your face piece, you won't see anything on that camera. Moisture, particulate will block the lens, and that is what a lot of firefighters associate with the term whiteout. New cameras haven't whited out since 2012. One of the things that's not listed in these studies that we have seen in our studies, in addition to the thermal imaging camera world and training and traveling around the world, is a lot of firefighters over rely on the TIC. That's the downside of technology. It's like we all over rely on our cell phones. They're staring in it too much, which actually calls a term you can look up called smartphone blindness. You stare at a bright light in the dark and you put it down, your eyes don't adjust. Then the camera light goes out, you don't know where you are. Failure to wipe the lens. They've, 9 Maydays we reviewed talked about that. Firefighters stated the TIC whited out or grayed out. It did not. It had moisture on the lens. That can come from also high moisture or cold smoke environments. You go into a large warehouse with a sprinkler head activation, good luck using a thermal imaging camera in many of those environments. You're talking about uniform temperatures, and you're talking about a lot of moisture coming down on you. You need to have other methods of orientation and take it a little bit slower. As a friend of mine says, that's a practical cause for a tactical pause. I need to take a moment and address that so I don't get in over my head. The issues we see is firefighters don't know what they're looking at on the camera. They don't know what the symbols mean. They don't know what high and low sensitivity means. They have no idea when their camera shows color, early, late. And a lot of them, unfortunately, are using cameras that have a lot of different application modes that have nothing to do with firefighting. And they use those incorrectly, which gets them in trouble. Or my personal favorite is their fire departments using cameras that are 15, 10, 15, 20 years old, or using situational awareness cameras that are low resolution and low refresh rate, and they expect them to perform like an HD TV. If you want to learn more about the limitations of thermal imaging cameras, we got a 12-minute free video there that will take you through that. Highly recommend you use our resources on YouTube. They're all free. We publish them every week, and we give them away in the hope that firefighters will use these to educate their departments. We understand people can't bring us in for training, that everybody has budget constraints and issues, but that doesn't mean we can't help you. Please use these resources. A lot of departments are. Uh, so let's talk about how we can prevent this. You've heard a little bit about the main purpose of what we're talking about, but here's something that I think has been mistaught or misinterpreted or passed along incorrectly. When you get promoted to company officer, that doesn't mean it's your total responsibility to keep everybody oriented. Yes, you are the designated adult. You are supposed to watch over your crew, but your crew is just as responsible as you are. The problem is I think we get too many of us thinking, well, my captain knows where I am or my lieutenant knows where I am. Well, what happens when your captain has a heart attack or your captain or lieutenant wanders off and gets disoriented? Now everybody's lost. So it's everyone's responsibility to work as a team, to constantly communicate. You should have fundamentally skill-based training. And hear this when I say this, it's going to hurt some feelings, in low to zero visibility environments that are not artificial fake smoke. Let me say it again, not fake smoke. Fake smoke equals fake firefighters. You hear me? That's going to hurt a lot of people's feelings, but I do not believe fake smoke is conducive to real firefighting challenges and training. We should eliminate that, other than just basic showing people what a limited visibility environment looks like, because real smoke responds differently than artificial glycerin-based smoke. And by the way, if you're using artificial smoke, read the label. There's still some stuff out there that has glycol in it. It's not good for you. You should breathe regular smoke at that point, because both of them are carcinogenic. RIT, SCBA emergency should be regularly trained on. Can't emphasize that enough. And those of you who teach RIT, please incorporate thermal imaging into it. That's the thing I see that's left out. I can locate and assess a firefighter faster by using the camera before we do all the necessary tasks to get them out, and I use that to help them locate secondary means of egress. And this is the other thing that's missing. The two things I see in the fire service that are neglected or put in last place is thermal imaging and behavioral health. They wait till the end of the year and see what money they got left over, and then that's when they do it. Friends and ladies and gentlemen, NFPA 1001 is now requiring new hires to have thermal imaging training. NFPA 1408 requires every firefighter to have thermal imaging training. It requires every fire department to use them to have written policies and standards on this, on how to use them. And I haven't found one fire department, that fully embraces 1408 to the letter. You might want to look it up. Read chapter 7. It's very informative. The things that we can do to help us out is, a lot of people have said this before, when you talk about life, if you start wrong, you often end wrong. If you listen to fires on the fire ground, if they start off with a bad size up, or they start off behind the 8 ball, you got everything going wrong, it's very difficult for them to catch up. Well, one of the things that you see consistently in these incidents where there are near misses or NIOSH reports is they point out consistently, and even in Don Abbott's work on Project Mayday, an incomplete or inadequate size up and a lack of 360. And that's not saying if the building's 1,000 by 1,000, you should do a 360. Get the battalion chief to drive around it, do something different. You can't walk around a building like that. On a standard house fire, a lot of firefighters are compelled to get this done so fast, they don't even look to see where they're going. It's like packing your family up to go to the beach and getting everything going, get in the car and just drive and hope you get there. The military thinks we're crazy for going into a place without a plan. And if you think you can size the entire building up with just 2 sides, good luck. Because America is really good at doing weird stuff to houses, especially non-permit based stuff. So you go in, you got 2 sides of it, and then you go in and find out the other 2 sides are not what you thought. We need to have a plan. That can be done simply by having a 360 with a camera and doing a very good scan at the door to get that live fire and layout. So even if the TIC fails at that point, we know the floor plan, we know where the fire is, we know where our pathways, egress points, RIT stuff's done, ladders are staged if we have to bring out victims or firefighters have to bail out. That should be standard. I worked with a great crew at Station 2 and Ladder 2. They did a primary before we stretched the line every single time if they were there. And Greg Nicholson had his guys throw ladders around that building every single time. They emptied that ladder bed. I never worried about not going to a window and not having a ladder there. If Greg Nicholson in ladder 2 was there, that was the most comforting feeling, knowing that they took truck work to the extreme. They did it right. So if we do those things, we're already set up for success. If you're a company officer, you need to monitor your crews and know their location. Incident commanders, this goes for you as well. Most of you stand out in the front yard and you listen to the radio and you think you're monitoring every transmission. I'm sorry. It's not humanly possible with all the background noise, without an aid, without to catch every single thing. Listen to the maydays and you will notice that the majority of them miss that transmission. They miss something critical. I had a firefighter, a friend of mine, tell me he was incident commander of a church fire. And all he heard was a broken transmission and the word day. All he heard was day. And he thought to himself, what word do we use that ends in day that doesn't mean mayday? And he said, command, copy the mayday, go ahead. And then they transmitted their mayday a second time. Now, I don't know about you, but my hearing's not that great. Now you put me outside with all that noise, you're going to miss something. And the other thing is, please don't overestimate our capabilities and distance to exit. In the disorientation study, it talks about firefighters going beyond the length of their search room, beyond the length of, going into 100,000, 200,000, 800,000 square foot building. You shouldn't work from the unburned side to the burned side in the building like that. You should find the shortest distance. That's one of the things that William Mora talks about, called a short attack, going from the shortest point of entry to the problem instead of taking 5,000 feet to get there when we could go around the Charlie side, open the bay door, and go right to the fire. And one of the other issues that we have trouble with consistently is rule of error management. I highly recommend you look up Virginia, the NOVA manual, and read about it's dedicated to Kyle Wilson, and it talks about the rule of error management. Basically, you have your thirds, a third to work, a third to get out, and that final third is an emergency. I am guilty of this just like anybody else. I'm sure if you raise your hand and admit that the majority of us wouldn't leave until our reviver alert or low air alarm went off. And now we're already in trouble if something bad happens. And from my aspect, what I would hope for you to learn today is if you take this information and train firefighters in object and hazard identification through their camera. You notice this picture of this MSAI tick here? If you would please check out the overview on that if you use this. Please make sure you follow that and follow the recommendations and lock that camera in white hot. The way the manufacturer has that set up from the factory, if you pick it up and bump it one time, when I talked about improper color palettes, it will reverse the color palette and take you to black hot. Now you're crawling towards the fire when you're trying to get out. That particular color palette should not be in a fire service camera, especially a situational awareness camera. But this particular feature will show you how to program it to maintain your safety. Please check that out. So when we talked about size up, let's look at an example from one of my instructors. This is an awesome guy, one of my lead instructors, Chief John Lightly. I want you to notice what happens in the first 10 to 20 seconds here that we can capture. When I hit play, watch. He's walking up, camera's bouncing around, and right there, bottom left corner or upper left corner is single pane window glass for a basement. It's lit up white. Keep watching. There's another one. There's a firefighter going in. As soon as he moves to the corner, you'll see this right here. I'll move it slowly so you can see it. On the far right, there's a yellow heat signature of the basement window well. What does that mean if you're seeing heat through single pane glass, which transfers energy? What's below those firefighters? Possible basement fire. In this case, it was. Does that change your incident action plan? Does it change where you stretch your line? It's very important we start right. A lot of these maydays can be traced back in disorientation to firefighters initiating an aggressive interior attack like we all would do without proper information on where the fire is. They go in and try to find the fire and they don't. They can't find it, and then conditions deteriorate and bad things happen. And that's what it says right here from William Mora. If you look at this scan that we got from one of our training fires, one of my instructors did this, you can see, notice the doorknob on the left-hand side. We'll talk about that here in a minute. If you look at the convection currents, we teach convection equals direction. You can see the fire is straight ahead of you down the hall to your left. You're seeing it move from hot to cold down that hallway, trying to backfill that room and exit out this 7x3 ventilation hole known as a front door. Now we know where the fire is. By the way, we do our scans threshold to threshold or room to room. We scan this room, we go to work, put the camera down. scan the next room, go to work, put the camera down. We are not filmmakers. We are not staring at cameras while we're moving. Please don't do that. Okay. So previous means of orientation that are still taught are stay on the hose line, stay on the wall, use your flashlight, use a search rope, use another firefighter. In theory, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is victims aren't typically found on walls. And if you go around the wall, think about what my friend says here in this great article. It's a firefighter from Myrtle Beach. I can't say his last name right, but Vincent has a very powerful statement that I love when I read this article. He said, yes, the wall is intended to be an orientation point on the right hand or left hand, but I would argue the effectiveness of our searches increase by using other means of orientation. After all, it's called a wall, not a railing. Go look at your kid's bedroom. How much wall would you really touch if you had to search it? For me, approximately 3 feet under their window. Otherwise, I'd be pushed out in the center room by dressers, a dollhouse, a heap of dirty clothes, a laundry basket, and beds. And isn't that where we expect to find our potential victims anyway? God bless him. That's the truth. If you crawl around the walls and there's nothing on those walls, you're in a training building, not in a real fire. In real fire, there's going to be stuff in your way, and we need to go, as firefighter rescue survey says, to where the victims are located. So what you can do as a firefighter, if you're using a camera or situational awareness camera, is train every single one of your firefighters on 2 objectives with that camera. It's very important you train them with that camera. They need to know what objects look like through their camera and hazards look like through their camera, not some other brand camera that they don't use. Because unfortunately, cameras all perform differently and show things differently. So if you use a Seek Fire Pro 300, then you need to train them on what this would look like, such as I'm looking at objects such as firefighters or victims, door frames, doors, windows, hose lines, floors, ceilings, stairs, infrastructure. Why is that important? Because other than the victim, the rest of that stuff, besides the hose line, doesn't move. If I can find those things, I can find my way out. See the hose line laid on the floor here, albeit it's a small training line, which is, I hate the word training line, which means it's a glorified booster line with 40 GPM training nozzle. But if you also look to the left of this picture, if you're trained in object identification, you can tell that that is a stairway railing leading down to the top of a Draeger Phase 5 container. So if we train firefighters to identify that and then identify hazards such as holes in floors, thermal severity, where a fire is, convection currents, height of convection currents, a full exhaust, a unidirectional flow path. What about walking around outside? I want to look for live or energized electrical equipment. It's energized or showing heat, overheated components, thermal bridging. That is a fancy word for conduction, heat transferring from one wall in an interior to another wall in the exterior, another room, telling you there's heat behind it. If you get them really good at those patterns and objects, so they can tell which one's a hazard, which one's an object, they're going to rescue themselves. Don Abbott's work talks about the majority of Maydays are resolved by self-rescue. What if we up that number by simply teaching them to find their way out on their own? And the first thing we have to tackle in that is teaching firefighters to scan properly. My doctor has told me I'm no longer allowed to watch YouTube. Unfortunately, I don't listen to my doctor, but I can tell you that firefighter scans on YouTube are horrendous. They're barely 10 to 15 degrees, and some of them are just sticking the camera straight ahead and thinking they're seeing the whole environment. That's like pulling up to an intersection, looking straight ahead and saying it's clear and pulling out. If you don't turn and look both ways, especially at a blind intersection, that could cost you your life. This is a free video to teach you how we recommend to scan. And by the way, IFSTA has finally adopted this as well, that firefighter tick scan should start low. You can carry it however you like. We have our own recommendation. If you have a pistol grip camera, we recommend you rotate the camera sideways. By the way, if you use a Fire Pro 300, you don't have to do that. It's already oriented in portrait mode, which is gangster grips. You just hold it like a cell phone and you can see the floor and the ceiling in one view. In 2 moves across that room, you can see everything instead of 6. It's a free video from instructor Joey Baxter, one of my lead instructors. Heck of a guy. You can learn about what we want you to learn and how to practice this. Your tick scan is the most important thing for you at that front door before you make entry, because you're only promised one good scan. Just like an acquired structure burn, you're promised one run, could be your last one. Make sure you get a good scan and find out where you're going, because you're not promised a great environment once you step in there. It could be hoarding conditions, could be terrible smoke conditions, could be all kinds of things. Could be sprinkler head discharge, could be a uniform temperature. You don't know. But if you get a good look before you make entry, you have a map. And the research shows in the neural pathways of the brain, if I give myself simple, short directions, not complicated ones, firefighters, if they have that mental map, they can respond to that route faster and lots of detailed information. When I told you about wiping the lens, I can't stress this enough. This is a picture of a victim next to a door with the lens that has not been wiped. It's very hard to see. We reviewed these Mayday incidents last year that all had to do with firefighters saying tick white it out or grayed out, and they were all standing up in a full exhaust and never wiped the lens of the camera. All these firefighters became lost, disoriented, some of them were injured or burned. Simply wiping that lens could clear that up momentarily long enough for you to see the problem. And unfortunately, there are some tick people out there teaching you not to wipe the lens because you're going to scratch it. Let me give you some information. That lens is germanium or silicon and has a DLC coating on it with diamond line coating. It's abrasion resistant. That doesn't mean you scrub it with a grill brush, but I'd rather have a scratched lens than a dead firefighter. Wipe the lens, find the victim, find the door, find your fellow firefighter, find your way out if necessary. So steps to preventing all this, let's start with good size ups. And that size up does not stop outside. If you notice the picture of the firefighter at the door here, this acquired structure burn that we got to do with Beaver Lane Fire and Rescue, notice the difference between the optical view and thermal view. Smoke over this firefighter's head versus how much heat's in front of them. By the way, fire is also coming from the Charlie side to the right. There are two fires in here. So if we look at it improperly, we could miss it. So make sure that scan's correct. Try to stay oriented. There's ways you can do that. There's a great tool called the Northern Star Fire Compass. I'll tell you about it at the end. That's great. Knowing other egress points. Don't just have one way in, one way out. William Moore talks about buildings that are completely enclosed. They've got one way in, one way out. We'll coin the phrase, that's a firefighter killer. You got one way in, one way out, large building, multiple windows that have all been bricked up, doors are barred shut. You're in trouble. You just don't know it yet. You better have more than one way out. Because usually when we get in trouble, we want the shortest route out, especially if it involves mayday or getting a victim out to safety. So how can we train you on those objects and hazard identification? Some of the things I mentioned, but I got a picture here for you to look at. This is a set of stairs in a burn building. And everybody gives me a hard time about burn buildings. That's not realistic. Okay, let's look at some different ones. Here is a burn building with a push bar or panic bar on the left, and they show up differently. Your door hardware shows up differently because it's metal. Metal is typically a low emissivity object, unless you like the bronze oil rub stuff that my wife likes. That may not reflect energy as much unless it's worn down. But you can see it with the tick because the tick thinks it's a different temperature. And what type of door? Is it metal? Is it fiberglass? Does it have glass inserts? Door features, doorknobs, panic bars, push bars. What about the hinges? What does that tell you? It tells you which way it opens, which is important. Okay? We talked about this in one of our last videos, that firefighters who train to rescue victims in burn buildings end up with an inherent training scar because they drag the victim to that door and hit that door and the door swings open. That doesn't happen on a residential structure. Doors open inward on most residential structures. Here's a picture of us training in Carrollton, Texas. Notice the door hardware where the flames are pushing out of here are lighting up either white or colorized in this case because they're metal and they're reflecting the energy off of. They're still hot, but I can clearly see where the door hardware is, which can help me regain orientation, locate a room, locate my way out, maybe just catch up with my crew. Maybe you got one of those jam up firefighters you just can't keep up with. Maybe you're 50 and he's 20. I don't know. But you can use this information for a lot of good benefit. But you've got to start practicing looking at it through your camera. Instead of watching mindless TikTok videos, start looking at pictures of thermal imaging videos, because here's why. One of my dear friends who's an instructor, and I'll let him tell his story one day when he's ready to tell it, but he talks about if he wasn't trained as well as he was, that the few seconds he had through his thermal imaging camera, he was able to recognize the stairs. And I would bet the average firefighter would not recognize that faint pattern was stairs. But he was so well trained and had the grace of God with him that day, he was able to locate those stairs. I challenge you to do the same. I credit that to him for doing that training that led him and his partner out of the building. Here's some other key features we can identify. If you've read the Loudoun County report or Meadowood Court report of the near miss incident, it talks about the firefighter identifying a window with the tick and then jumping through that window. Clearly, we can see here, this window, we probably don't want to jump through because it has bars on the other side, but we can tell it's a window. We can tell in front of us in the middle picture, that's a dining room. What if that dining room showed you a long table, 3 high chairs, and a motorized wheelchair? Is that something we should be concerned about? And that last picture on the right is a more realistic picture because that's a real house fire in a basement, and that's what a basement window well looks like through bad conditions in a real house fire. So I want you to know it's not going to be this pretty perfect picture because more than likely you're going to be working and you're going to have stuff falling all over you, insulation, lots of moisture from flowing water, and it's probably what you're going to see. No matter what camera you get, the pictures we like are not the pictures we're really going to see in reality. So we teach firefighters to recognize the type of room, egress points, and direction. That's it. We don't give them a dissertation. How about hazard identification? This is a picture of a firefighter standing, and he or she is unaware that there is a massive amount of that ductwork that has melted, and all those wires are now hooked to the back of his SCBA. Is that important for the company officer to recognize? Sure. Many firefighters have been hung up in wires. There's reports of some unfortunately dying being hung up in that. We want to look for holes in floor. What do they look like? Are they dark? Are they hot? Do they blend in? It depends on the environment. Like we talked about victim identification. A hole in the floor that has a different temperature behind it, it's called a cavity effect. The energy in that hole will concentrate and it will make it look differently. If it's cold, it'll show up. If it's hot, it'll show up. The danger is when it's the same temperature. And if you're scanning straight ahead, that hole will blend in. You need to get different views of it, looking down at it and looking up. Stairways leading to basements or fires, such as a split level house. Those are missed often, and firefighters don't realize they have a fire beneath them. High reflection areas. One of my friends, Chad Daly, posted a picture of a room full of mirrors. That would mess you up. You need to train on what a reflection looks like and what a true heat source looks like and how to discern the difference. I was taught to wave at it. You wave in that big room that Chad showed me, you're going to see a bunch of you. I'm going to take a hose stream and I'm going to flow until reflection, either I break the mirror or I hit the heat source. So the heat source is going to go away. The reflection won't as long as I flow water on it. Here's the actual video of those wires through a Seek Attack probe. You can see the wires hanging down as these crews from Georgia are fighting a 3rd floor attic fire. You can actually see the stairs, the attic stairs moving up there. And notice when we swing around, you can see some of those wires hanging down. That's why it's good to have a good camera. And right there is all those wires we just talked about. You can also tell he's wearing a Scott air pack. You see the second stage right there that's dark. The bottle's dark because he's breathing and it's cold. That's important to note as well. Here is a stairs that you might want to note. Check out this stairwell and tell me if you want to crawl down it. What's coming up these stairs here, ladies and gentlemen? You have fire beneath you. Is that a stair you want to go down without a hose line? Preferably not. Because convection is more than just direction. Convection is what cooks us. If you've got an air fryer, you understand convection. If you look up Fort Air Oven Test in NFPA 1971, it's a convection oven. It's how they test your gear, one of 70 tests. And it will cook you. And there's only so much energy you can take before that energy is transferred to you, and then you are rendered ineffective. So stay within your limitations by keeping the environment tenable for you so you can get to the victim or get to the fire and put it out. Right. Here's a video of a gangster grip scan from our friends Bears at the Oath. And I want you to notice all the detail you can pick up when we talk about seeing the floor to ceiling. And we can also see right here 2 windows, furniture. We see our thermal layer in the yellow and that white line. And if you notice, as we turn, there's a ceiling fan. In most rooms, where are ceiling fans located? In the center. Now, this ceiling fan's had a rough day. But if I can look at things that typically don't move, like stairwells and elevator shafts, they typically go straight up, right? They don't move. I can know where they are. That can lead me to points of orientation. If I'm in a bedroom and I have a ceiling fan in the middle, I can follow it to the corners and I can find what? Windows. If I find floor vents, they're either below a window or they might be in the ceiling above a window. Things that are standard in housing infrastructure can help you locate your way. If you look, you can also see the fire is to our right. And we know where to put our water. We know where to start our search, all that data from roughly an 8 to 10 second scan. That can prevent firefighter disorientation just by knowing where we're going. Here's 2 stairways for you. I want you to look really closely at these because this is what it's realistically going to look like for you if you're in trouble. The picture on the left is a commercial stairs leading up that we can tell, at least from this photo. Notice the air bottle is hot. This was at Greensboro, and it was 90 something degrees outside, and the SCBAs were sitting outside. So that's why his bottle looks hot. He's not in trouble from burning up. Those of you may catch that who listened to what we talked about before. The picture on the right is an actual house fire with basement stairs leading down. You can see the stairwell, you can see the door casing, you can even see some door hardware there if you look close enough. That's why you have to be trained to know what this looks like ahead of time. The last thing you want is to be spending precious seconds. If you're in trouble, your low air alarm has quit, which usually means you've got a little over 100 to 150 PSI, and that's the average person's 17 to 30 breaths. Do you want a smooth bump to the pump or go, what was that? I can't really see it that well. No, you want to identify those points of reference and you want to move to that egress path or move to that down firefighter or whatever it is you're searching for. And you want to do it while you still have air left in your bottle. Okay. There's another thing that's taught in thermal imaging that's often not talked about. They talk about reflections and reflective surfaces being dangerous, and they are. However, we can use them to our advantage because if we know what a reflective surface looks like through a thermal imaging camera, we can locate things such as panic bars on commercial doors. They're usually a shiny metal and they stick out. Metal door handles, metal window frames in commercial buildings, glass or windows like we talked about in the Metalwood Court incident. SCBA components like the MSA band on their air pack, UAC connections, or if you're into the word UAC, sounds like yak to me, RIT, buckles, clips, etc. Check out my man's Halligan bar here. Notice he's got that wrap in the middle that covers it up, but those forks stand out. If a Halligan bar is tuned right, it's going to shine like a beautiful mirror. And we can use it in forceful entry to locate the hardware of the door, locate our way out, and we can look at hose and hose couplings. Hose is a high emissivity object, but hose couplings is low emissivity, which typically because most hose couplings have been treated rather roughly and they've been ground and they're shiny at that point. So I can see that hose coupling leading me out. Those are things you need to know what they look like before you get in trouble. I don't want to wait till my house has an incident and go, oh, where's our insurance policy? Are we covered for that? No, I should know that. I should know where it is, know the number to call. If I'm in trouble or my crew's in trouble, I should know what to look for. I shouldn't go, oh, what was that training we did 2 months ago and I wasn't paying attention because I didn't think it would ever happen to me? Well, it will. If you keep saying it won't happen to you, you're asking for it. I pray it doesn't happen to you. My goal is to get firefighters home. I want them to win. I want them to rescue people, and I want them to get home. It's a 3-part mission. Pretty simple. But unfortunately, we don't train on some of these, and I want to improve that. Here are some other low emissivity objects that may help you. Look at the eagle on this firefighter's helmet, how it stands out. Check out the MSA pack with the band. Notice certain components on the SCBA stand out. And if you look in the other picture, you can see the connection where the hose terminates to the regulator. On the MSA, you can also see a metal band right before that. There are lots of things on a firefighter that are shiny. Your buckles, your clips, things of that nature, they may stand out, which will help you locate them. So those are things you can help other firefighters who are in RIT scenarios or Mayday scenarios. When you're doing RIT training, this is a great way to help identify how do I package them, where are those connection points at? Do I want to fiddle around and try to find them, or do I just want to simply look at it and then grab it? By the way, Seek Thermal is the only one that makes a camera that can focus on these objects at 12 inches. Every other camera, you're going to have depth perception issues because their focal range is 3 feet, 1 meter to infinity. In other words, I can't hold that camera and look at a firefighter's SCBA up close because it'll look blurry and I'll have depth perception issues. So keep that in mind that you need something that'll help you when you have to work. Here are 2 other types of air packs. Those the previous ones were MSAs. These are Scott's. Notice the bottles are dark. The firefighters are breathing. A wire frame from Scott, some of those that has been taken care of, they'll reflect, or you can put metal clips on them like Joey and I were talking about the other day. You can put markers on them. Anything that's shiny will make them stand out. The helmet itself actually has a clip on the back, the eagle. In some cases, some people like me like metal shields from Taylor's Tins. I have a specific one that we made that stands out through a thermal imaging camera on purpose. It's by design. And when we look at those SCBA components, look how easily we can identify these things. Where their bottle is their waistband strap. And in many cases, if you look at this, firefighters, if they're in real trouble and they've run out of air, like my department had an incident, a firefighter abandoned their SCBA when they ran out of air. So I may find the air pack separate from them. If you look at that far left picture, you can see that halogen bar we mentioned earlier, both ends. And if I'm having to do RIC connections, those connections are easier to locate if I take a quick look with the camera. These are important things that we can simply do easier, faster, more efficient by simply taking a quick 1 to 2 second look. There are friends of mine who are expert search experts that say that's taking too much time. If I take the time to find those connections, I will beat the person who fumbles around in the dark, who's trying to find them, who doesn't know where to grab. When you want to go right to that UAC or right to that EVSS connection or right to that regulator, than trying to fumble around and find it when your firefighter is already out of air or about to run out of air. It's not an ego contest, ladies and gentlemen. This is about efficiency and being better, smarter. And I don't like to use the word safer because a lot of people are all upset about the word safe now. But safety is based on your level of training, not the environment we're in. The environment we work in is not safe. Safety comes with firefighters who are trained and trained realistically and trained for the worst. When we talk about hazard identification, we can use our camera to identify convection currents, superheated areas, thermal bridging, like we talked about earlier. The fire might be in the room next to us. Don't crawl towards or into the fire room. You may laugh at that statement, but I have reviewed videos of firefighters who had a camera on their coat and never picked it up and crawled into the fire room and didn't know it till it was too late. Or if they're using a particular incorrect color palette, such as black hot, they crawled towards the fire room thinking they were crawling away from it. And you better know your camera and have thermal imaging interpretation correct. You know when yours shows colorization, 300 degrees, 500 degrees, 1,000 degrees. Do you know what convection currents look like through your camera? Do you know when it switches to low sensitivity if it does? Please know this before you go into a real fire. You better do a lot of training with that device. Majority of firefighters touch a camera once a year, if that. And if you touch it one time a year, how good are you going to be when you really need it? You're not. Okay. Here's an example of identifying superheated areas. This is at Great Lakes Hot in Michigan. There's our fire room, pretty clear to identify that. It's in survey mode in the Seek Attack Pro VRS. Notice the convection currents telling us it's moving from hot to cold. I want you to watch something though, that's pretty important. We're gonna simply close the door and notice what we stop. My search buddies, that's an awesome thing. When we open the door, what happens? Comes right back, right? So that's our rebound we talk about. But look at this. When the door is closed, I can still see heat signatures around the door indicating, hey, there might be a fire in that room, which can lead me to that room or lead me away from that room depending on my conditions and what I'm doing. But if you're trying to start from the greatest thermal threat back and isolate and then work, locate the fire and isolate it. You know where the fire is now. You've stopped that threat. That's going to stop a lot of the disorientation issues right there. Here are two devices that will help you immensely when you're talking about assisting with orientation. The FirePro 300, in my opinion, is the ultimate situational awareness camera. I don't think any firefighter should be without one. When you look at the amount of money we spend on everything else in the fire service and on ourselves, $1,000 is not that big of an investment, especially when we spend more on a cell phone and the leather helmet costs almost twice as much as one of these cell phone or these FirePro 300s. A friend of mine makes a small digital compass you can put in your mask called the Northern Star Fire Compass. It's around 100, 200 bucks. So for less than the cost of a cell phone, I have redundancy. I have something that tells me direction. I have something that gives me diagnostic data of where I am, where the fire is, and where my way out would be. And Seek Thermal is the only one that makes a situational awareness camera that has a decision-making engine in it. In other words, it has the same performance as a Attack Pro VRS or Attack Pro Plus, any of those. It just doesn't have the housing that those cameras do, and it is not as insulated as well. You can learn about both of these on these QR codes. I highly recommend you look at this. If you are a department that responds to large buildings, big buildings, you need to have a plan. My friend Chad Daly and I talk about this pretty regularly. They've got some pretty impressive buildings being built near them. You better have a plan, and it better be beyond a 200-foot pre-connect, because some of these buildings they're talking about are 1 million square feet. What is your backup plan? They had a story they shared recently where they used ice packs to locate their way in and out of a cave using the camera. They put cold packs, marking their way like breadcrumbs. Get creative with this, ladies and gentlemen. You are the answer, not me. It's people are depending on you as a firefighter, and your family's depending on you to get home. That is a lot of pressure on you, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. So don't sit around and play video games and watch TikTok all day when your life's on the line and someone else's life's on the line. And all we have to do is, my friend Robert Owen says it best. Why don't you do the 1-2-3 method? 1 hour of working out, 2 hours of reading, and possibly 3 hours of training. I may have butchered that, Robbie, but if I did, I'm sorry. But I think it's a great rule of 1, 2, 3, or 1 hour each. However you want to do it. But how many hours do you still have left in your 24-hour or 48-hour shift? You can still wax your truck, work on your motorcycle, do your sideline business, whatever. But that's not much to ask. And on your days off, maybe we should read. I don't want you to take away from your family, but read. Read something. Read about the things that we're going to share with you with this, because this is a 1 hour video on the Fire Pro 300 that you don't even have to read. You can watch, you can listen to it. It's a free webinar. And after this webinar, we will have 14 hours of free educational resources sponsored by Seek Thermal, from everything from disorientation to size up to fire attack, free. No manufacturer has done that. None. And they're providing to you as a firefighter for your safety and your performance to do your job better. That's what we're trying to do. This particular camera, you can learn a little bit about it. I won't go through the specs with it, but I will tell you, if you hold it like you're holding this picture, it is already in the gangster grip mode. You don't have to turn it sideways. It's 57 degrees tall by 42 degrees wide. So that gives you better picture clarity and also gives you more image in front of you from floor to ceiling in a residential context. It's an awesome tool. I highly recommend you go try it and test it in a burn environment. Don't believe me. And everything I've shared with you today is available in a free Google Drive. This presentation, the firefighter disorientation study, my notes on it, some other things, some media, some video, a couple other resources, and this presentation. All for you, you firefighter, to use, share, however you want to do it. Just please make sure you use this stuff. Make sure you share it, learn from it, and go deeper than what I gave you in 60 minutes. There's so much more to understanding what's happening to firefighters. If I could look at all the NIOSH reports and summarize the contributing factors into 2 things, this is what you would get from me. Firefighters are surprised by changing conditions or collapse, or they're lost or disoriented. Those are the 2 things that happen every single line of duty death incident. Something surprised them, something disoriented them. That's it. Now, I'm not a math magician, but 2 areas is not as big and as complicated as a list of the top 50 contributors, the top 100 contributors. They may have something very similar if you dig deep enough and realize that if we work on these things together at the company level, don't wait on your fire department to come out with a program. Just look at the person. Work at the company level. Make sure your company's dialed in on all your fundamentals: search, stretches, throwing ladders, know your first due, and go look at those weird target hazards that could really get you in trouble. We know firefighters are going to possibly face a greater risk in a commercial building, but we shouldn't be dying, getting disoriented in residential structures, and we do. A lot of people say, oh, not that many die. Well, if I took you away from your kitchen table right now, I'll bet your family would care, especially if it was preventable and you didn't die with a baby in your arms. I want you to win. I'm tired of firefighters losing when we could win. And that means winning for the citizen, winning for their property, and winning for your family. Take this to heart. If you need anything from us, you can contact us here. That's my website. It has a contact us button. My email's at the bottom. That's my telephone number. You can text me. All of my cadre will be glad to help you. Many of them are on social media. You can check out our Twitter pages, our Facebook pages, our Instagram pages, our YouTube pages, our TikTok, our 2 LinkedIn pages. We have a private Facebook group called Tactical Thermal Imaging that is only for firefighters and thermal imaging. I don't allow anything else on it. If you Google it or look under Facebook, under search, type in Tactical Thermal Imaging, don't just hit join. You have to answer 2 questions, or I think you're a robot or somebody selling something. And you're in there. There's 9,000 people in that group. And there's free files, free resources. You can ask questions, all of that for free. This will be uploaded to our YouTube channel once it's edited. All of that for you. Make sure you share this information. Keep doing a great job. Take care of each other. Take care of your family. Stay safe. God bless you all. Thank you for your time.
Thanks again, Andy. Appreciate it. And just like I mentioned earlier, we have demos, we have burns. You guys can just go on our website, www.thermal.com. Find out information about our burn program as well as authorized dealers in your area. I mentioned that, Andy mentioned it. We want you guys to burn with our cameras. So thank you again, Andy. Thank you everybody for attending. And with that being said, that's a wrap on today's webinar. Appreciate it, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care.